All right, guys. This next set of notes is entitled, Why Didn't Reconstruction Work the Way the Presidents Wanted? Um, if you guys remember from the other day, Abraham Lincoln's hope for Reconstruction was that the Union would be able to forgive and forget and reincorporate the southern states into the Union as quickly and effectively as possible while still protecting the rights of African Americans. Andrew Johnson becomes president after Abraham Lincoln and has his go at presidential reconstruction. But as we saw today, that effort failed. So let's go over why Reconstruction didn't work out the way the presidents wanted. So the most important thing really to remember at the outset, most Southerners are not going to be willing to accept former slaves, African Americans, with equality. They don't view them as their equals and they don't think they should be treated equally. So in the years following the Civil War, many of the southern states are passing laws called black codes. We talked about these, how they restricted the rights, the freedoms, and the opportunities of African Americans. So some of the things the ex-slaves couldn't do was they couldn't quit their jobs without permission. They weren't allowed to own guns. They weren't allowed to own or rent farmland. They weren't even allowed to hold meetings at night. And really, the strictest of these black codes said that unemployed freedmen, unemployed former slaves, could be forced to work for nothing. And we've talked about how they're not slaves anymore. This is a step above slavery, but it is not a large step above slavery for African Americans in the South. And many Republican members of Congress are going to get really mad when they hear about these black codes being enacted in the South. They feel like they've just fought a war for 4 years in an effort to bring about an end to slavery and feel like the South hasn't really learned its lesson. So after Republicans gained a large majority, a supermajority of the seats in Congress in 1866, they decided that they're going to take over and pass some stricter Reconstruction laws. And even though President Johnson disagreed with the radical Republicans leading Congress, he just wasn't strong enough to stop them in terms of political power. They were just they had too large of a majority in Congress so they could override his vetoes. So Congress begins establishing their new rules for Reconstruction called Congressional Reconstruction. And Congress went about laying out how states could be admitted, and it included stricter rules than President Johnson had in the year following the Civil War. It was a much tougher process for southern states to be readmitted into the Union. They also said that states that had not yet been readmitted to the Union would be ruled by the Northern military, by the U.S. military. It would be martial law until these states were readmitted. They also added 2 amendments, the 14th and the 15th Amendments, to the Constitution that these states had to accept before they were allowed to rejoin the Union. And this cartoon that we looked at last night really exemplifies this standoff, this awkward collision as it is between Andrew Johnson and the radical Republicans in Congress.